Okay. Well, I'd like to not belabor things any longer. I want to welcome everybody. We're thrilled that you are here. My name is Chris Haug. For those of you who do not know me, I am the chapter director of the Columbia Mid-Maryland chapter of Startup Grind. For those of you who have never heard of us before, we are the largest global community of entrepreneurs with more than 5 million community members in 650 plus chapters in 140 countries around the world. And our mission is to do everything that we can to help educate, inspire, and connect our communities with the resources that they need to have the greatest opportunities of becoming phenomenally successful businesses. And we live by 3 very simple core values. We give first, we don't take. We help others before we help ourselves. And we look for ways to make friendships, partnerships, and collaborate, and not just pass business cards back and forth and practice zero-sum games. So that in 30 minutes or less is my 30-second elevator speech about Startup Grind. And we're thrilled that you are here. Like I said, I want to welcome everybody. I think you're going to find that we are going to have an incredible program this afternoon. We actually are blessed to have a guest appearance, and that is Susie Morosevich, who was our featured fireside chat guest. I think it was 3 weeks ago, right, Susie? Plus
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
Sounds about right. Maybe about a month ago. Yeah.
Okay. And Susie is the founder and CEO of
Telebehavioral Health
US. And she has taken and gone from a bootstrap idea to she's experiencing now 1,000% growth period over period, and she is serving an incredible need. So welcome, Susie.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be back. I'm very excited. Thank you.
And without further ado, I would like to get started. And one of the things that I wanted to do very early on, well, for a while now, I've known, or at least been highly suspect of the fact that entrepreneurs are a special breed of individual. We bring certain superpowers to the table, but with those superpowers come some additional liabilities and problems. When we started into the pandemic, I had a feeling that those issues were going to arise and exacerbate themselves exponentially. But at the time, at the beginning of the pandemic, I didn't want to do anything too quickly in knee-jerk reaction, because I had a feeling that this was going to be a long, ugly slog, and wanted to make sure that we came out with useful information and help at the right time. And so I think right now we are at the right time. Number one, we're beginning to see some light at the end of the tunnel, and it looks like it's actually daylight and not another freight train coming at us. And the second thing is that's both good and bad, because now we need to go through another complete adjustment in psychology, mental health, and physical and psychological perspectives on things as we now move into what I like to call the long tail of developing whatever World 2.0 is going to look like for us. And it's always concerned me, because I know I've struggled with some of these, that there has been a lack of focus on mental health in general, but in particularly for those of us who are entrepreneurs. And that has always bothered me, because I knew I struggled with finding the resources that could deal with my particular needs and issues. And so I wanted to try to do something about it, do my small part about it. And, you know, for now more than ever, as we move forward over the next year to a year and a half, 2 years, whatever, we are going to need to provide one another and our communities with even more help and support, particularly sensitivity to recognition of and recognition of the symptoms and the patterns of mental health with entrepreneurs. Because if we as entrepreneurs aren't right mentally, and I don't mean that by being insane or crazy or schizophrenic, etc., but as we all know, mental health on a daily basis takes a different toll on each of us. And while we may not recognize it up front, it impacts not only our performance, but the performance of our co-founders, our teams, our employees, but more importantly, our relationships with family and friends. So it's with that in mind that we decided to put together Mental Health Month in the month of April. And as I said, we hosted Susie back, I believe it was the first or the beginning of the second week in April. And if you were interested, you can go out and watch that event on our website, which is www.startupgrind.com /Columbia-Maryland /. And you'll see the event up there in under completed events. And then because April has been so unusual for me personally, I came down, I tested positive for COVID, and that was the week that we were supposed to originally host Dr. Freeman. And fortunately, as it turns out, I was completely asymptomatic and recovered nicely, had no ill effects whatsoever. But then I had to turn around and underwent an extensive heart procedure and had to take a little time off to recover from that. So for that, I apologize, everybody, for the delay in having the second half of our month, but I am thrilled that we are now doing so. And without further ado, it's my thrill and my pleasure and honor to introduce to all of you Dr. Michael Freeman, who is a preeminent psychologist, researcher, serial entrepreneur, and founder of an international groundbreaking research-based mental health organization known as Econa. And just to give you a little background, I don't want to go too long because Michael and I are going to talk about this. Michael is known worldwide for his focus and his specialty on mental health, behavioral health, and mental health issues related to entrepreneurs. He has been quoted in major industry publications. Sorry about that. Scientific journals, business publications. He is considered to be the godfather of this specialty. And he is a psychologist, a fourth generation entrepreneur, an executive coach, and entrepreneurship researcher, as well as behavioral health systems architect. He currently serves as clinical professor of psychiatry at the University of California, San Francisco School of Medicine, and is a mentor in the Residence Center at USCF. He received his MD degree from UCSF School of Medicine after completing related advanced training programs at UC Berkeley and at the Sorbonne. As I said, Michael is also the founder and CEO of Econa. It is an international center of excellence for entrepreneurial mental wellness. And Econa offers evidence-based workshops and peer support groups co-creates programs with founder communities globally, and supports academic research and entrepreneur-centered mental health wellness issues. With that, I would like to welcome Michael.
Thanks so much, Chris. I really appreciate it. And what Chris has just said is pretty much true. We have a friend in Mexico, so that makes us a multinational organization. And in addition to all of those highlights of my CV, I'm the guy who takes out the garbage on Tuesday night. So the idea here is we're going to talk about mental wellness and mental health for entrepreneurs. And having a sense of humor, by the way, is pretty restorative. And I would add that one to your self-care list. We have a small group today, which means we can have an informal conversation. And I would encourage that, actually. Maybe we should just start by that. Let's kind of go around the room and let me ask everyone just to introduce yourself briefly and let me know like one thing you'd like to take home from our talk today. And Chris, since it displays differently on every screen, maybe you can just call on people.
Sure. Cheryl, let's start with you.
Cheryl, you're muted.
Fixed. So my name is Cheryl Lohman. I'm the CEO and founder of Medaptic, which is an Internet of Medical Things company. The quick pitch on ours is I invented Quick Meds, a bedside medication dispenser to be used in the hospital setting so patients could access their low-risk meds without needing to ask for the nurse. And currently, we've got a phase 1 SBIR from the National Science Foundation to develop this. And I'm in the Washington, D.C. area. As I was telling Chris, I'm looking for a co-founder. But this entrepreneurial journey for me has been complicated by chronic fatigue syndrome. And so I'm dealing with a chronic illness and thus technically on disability and on Medicare, and would very much like to find a therapist to help me out with a lot of these challenges that I face being an entrepreneur with a chronic illness and how I deal with that. However, Medicare in Maryland literally has 0 qualified therapists who take Medicare. So, that's where I find myself.
Okay.
I would like to help you out with that.
You could connect me to somebody who's takes Medicare?
It might take a hot minute, but I have Medicare nailed down, and we're in multiple states, and it takes me an hour and 13 minutes to do a contract in a new state. So we could possibly connect you to a therapist there, but it would have to kind of start from scratch-ish.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but we'll DM me and we'll do it off this. But yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Well, no, that's, you said, what would I like to take home from this? I'd like to take home a highly qualified, and I'm probably looking for a Psych D for this work. Okay, so not a social worker.
Okay.
I know some are highly trained, but some are not. And so I think probably my best bet is going to be with a Psych D.
Okay, that might be a little bit more of a dig for us.
Right.
But let's touch base off, and I would still love to help connect you to something. I can help find something for you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay, Patrick.
Hey there. So I'm a startup guy, founder, exited founder, working on what I hope to be my next super platform and entrepreneurial venture that launch out and do what I've already done before. And then for this meeting, I came to get a takeaway of a survey, an understanding, a look across the landscape of this and find out more.
Okay, great. All right, Stephanie.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Stigma. I am actually here with Susie. I'm the Chief Administrative.
By the way, welcome.
Thank you.
It's now good to see that you actually have a real organization and Susie wasn't yanking our chain.
Yeah, no, we're going strong. It's been a good year for us.
I could only keep with the Wizard of Oz routine for 4 years, and that was it.
So yeah, I'm the Chief Administrative Officer and co-founder that came on board after Susie had been plugging away with TBH for a couple of years. I joined almost a year ago, and really I'm here just to kind of gain understanding and wisdom from you all, and yeah, hear more about what's going on.
Okay, Sean.
Hey everybody, I'm Sean Sutherland. Aside from having the distinct honor of being co-director of the Columbia chapter, I also work for a creative agency called Kapauza up in Baltimore. Really, mental health has been a huge part of my professional and personal development the last couple of years. It's definitely something I'm more aware of now, especially with COVID hitting me. I was a bit of an extrovert, and so taking away events for me was not handled well. Let's just say that. So always looking to connect with people that have a better handle on things and ways to handle mental stress, fatigue, all that kind of good stuff.
Great. Lisa Anderson.
Hi there.
How
So
are you?
I'm good, thank you. Excited to be here, and a little context on me. So I'm a therapist out in San Francisco, and I'm here to excited to hear Michael share his latest musings on entrepreneurial mental health, and we worked together a little bit on some research that I know is referenced here today. And as Michael's continued to work on Econa, there's so many more findings that I'm always curious to keep an ear out for. So, and of course, what that helps me with is in helping my own therapy clients. So I see high achievers and entrepreneurs with depression, anxiety, shaky self-esteem, anger management stuff. And so to be able to kind of keep up with the latest helps me be a better therapist. I'm excited to be here.
Super. Well, welcome. We're thrilled you're here. And then let's see. Last up is Liz Richardson. Hi, Liz. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me. I am Liz Richardson, one of the co-founders of Indigo Inc. Digital Printing, and we're a commercial printer based out of Columbia, Maryland. And we have been in business for about 18 years. And so I guess I'm here because it feels like it's been an 18-year marathon with no end in sight. And so I'm just curious to hear how people handle the stress and ongoing demands that, owning a company brings on. So that's why I'm here.
Okay, well, thank you. Now, I do want to ask everybody again. Michael and Susie and I are going to be putting together some material that we are going to distribute to everybody that wants it post-event. And I need to make sure that I have your contact information in the chat so that we can communicate with you offline. Unfortunately, I'm not able to share anything through Startup Grind's formal email system. I can't make attachments. I can't do all the kinds of things that I would normally like to do. That's why I'm asking for everybody's contact information so that we can provide you with resources, tools, ideas, and suggestions moving forward. That's one of the key takeaways, goals of mine this evening.
Do you need someone to grab those for you and put them in a list?
Actually, the other thing I want to make sure everybody knows is we are recording this. We are going to create a video out of this event. And as soon as I get that edited and posted, I will share the link with everybody so that you can review it at your leisure or as many times as you would like. to answer your question, Susie, Sean Sutherland is going to be backing me up on that. And in the recording process, it automatically captures whatever is in the chat room. So as long as it's there, I'll get it one way or the other. But thank you. So that being said,
All right.
Yeah, Michael, let's start.
I can dive in. That was very helpful.
Please, let's go. Let's dive in.
Yeah, well, thanks again, and for sharing what your particular interests are. And what I would like to do, just because I'm a geeky university professor, is just start at a high level and kind of orient you to the issues. Hold on a second. There we go. And then, but let me ask you just to interrupt with questions as we go along, because there's so few of us that we can have a conversation. So Econa is this project I started with some colleagues of mine, and we have a website, econa.net, and you can see everybody who's involved, except for Lisa Andreessen, because I haven't figured out the right way to get her involved yet, but hopefully eventually that will happen. And what we're trying to do is to create resources for entrepreneurs around mental wellness, and to destigmatize mental health differences and normalize, because as Chris said at the beginning, it's very true, entrepreneurs are just a different breed. We got to just accept that, and it's what makes us great and what makes us vulnerable at the same time. And so normalizing it and understanding the package is super helpful. And then figuring out how to create risk management strategies around some of the vulnerabilities, like burnout, I heard mentioned a couple times as just one example. We do population-based mental health needs assessments. So like one of these days, it would be great to survey the members of Startup Grind and kind of create a textured profile of the mental health characteristics of you guys as a group. And we also create programs and services like this for organizations that we partner with, and we get into some consulting projects as well. Here's the image that I'm a psychiatrist as well as a psychologist, and I am on the faculty at UC San Francisco. And this is the image that I like about trying to maintain stability, because, you know, as entrepreneurs, you're familiar with the roller coaster effect, and you recognize just by tracking your own emotional experience how easy it is to be knocked off center emotionally as an entrepreneur. You're constantly being impacted by events, some of them extrinsic, some of them intrinsic, that are destabilizing. And so how can we like appreciate that and maintain a sense of stability? This is a model that I use to think about mental health and wellness as a continuum. And what I'm trying to show here is that over here on the left, on one end of the continuum, is mental illness and disability. And I'll show you some statistics in a minute, but there is quite a bit of diagnosable mental health conditions among entrepreneurs. And that doesn't mean you can't function at a high level and succeed with your business. It's just a matter of being aware of that and managing it. For example, one of the entrepreneurs that I worked with is a woman who had bipolar 1 disorder with psychotic features. And when her company was in peak production mode, she would like put on a headset and listen to music in order to screen out auditory hallucinations. She was severely mentally ill, but she had a really terrific business going. She had about 18 employees, and her customers were like household name type of celebrities. On the other side is peak ability and peak performance and wellness and flourishing. And the whole idea of mental health is to be able to get to a point where you can flourish and live up to your potential as an individual. And in the middle is where most of the entrepreneurs live. You know, people who are basically well, but perhaps vulnerable, and people who are basically well and also kind of resilient. And so when I begin to, as a psychiatrist, like work with an entrepreneur, I start by trying to assess where in this continuum, you know, do you live, and then make a plan that goes from there. The reason that I think it's important to have a mental health conversation about entrepreneurs in particular is because entrepreneurs are people that have a very big impact. You know, many of you either currently or in the past and in the future have employees. And so if you have a mental health issue as an entrepreneur, it's going to affect your team. You've got co-founders, you have senior leadership team members who are counting on you, and you're compensating them with equity. And so they need you to be well in order to for them to benefit from the business as well. And then in addition to your senior leadership team and your employees, you've got customers and you have suppliers. So it's as a small business or a medium-sized business or a big business, you're part of an ecosystem, and these symptoms that derailed you as an individual have a ripple effect throughout the ecosystem. So I think that focusing on the well-being of entrepreneurs is a great way to leverage what mental health has to offer in terms of being able to have a multiplier effect across a large group of people. So here let's take a look at this graphic. I've been trying to figure out how to express this idea with a simple image for a long time, and I think I finally got it. And this is my 30,000 foot view of what goes on in the world of entrepreneur mental health. What I'm trying to say, you know, at the top is that entrepreneurs, like Chris said, have unique mental health differences and vulnerabilities and superpowers. And the green circle on this chart represents the universe of entrepreneurs. And the reason it's green is because entrepreneurs have personality traits, and 100%, I would say 100% of entrepreneurs have personality traits. If you were to just stop for a minute, why don't you just do this? Why don't you stop for a minute and think of 3 words that describe your personality? You know, are you shy? Are you bold? Are you adventurous? Are you cautious? Are you, well, somebody said Chris is an extrovert. Somebody else in the room is an introvert. Just think about your own personality for a second. And you can tell us what it is later when we get into our conversation. But whatever your personality is, that's part of mental health, because personality traits are brain-based and they are genetically transmitted, and at least 50%. So, you know, if Chris, if you're an extrovert by nature, that's largely inherited. But if someone else in the room is an introvert by nature, there's the other 50%, and you can learn how to be more outgoing and have more kind of expansive social skills. So it's this interplay between environment and it's not nature or nurture. It's this sort of combination of both.
Hey, Michael, could I ask a quick question? Because
Please do.
I've always considered myself one of two. I've either considered myself an introverted extrovert or an extroverted introvert. Is that a thing, or am I just hallucinating?
That is a thing. And so personality traits you have your personality traits when you're asleep, but they're not activated until you get into a context. And so it's entirely possible for you to be introverted kind of as a default setting, but in certain contexts, like a networking event, then you might find yourself being more outgoing because, and we'll talk about this in a minute, entrepreneurs are, if there's one thing that entrepreneurs have in common, it's that they pursue goals. And if it's in your interest to meet a lot of people because it's aligned with the goal that you're pursuing as an entrepreneur, then you'll override the introversion and, at least temporarily in that context, be more extroverted. So that's kind of how it works. There's a lot of, it's highly contingent, but the personality never goes away. It's there for a lifetime. And then above and beyond personality, the larger circle that's blue there, that represents the universe of people that have pre-existing mental health conditions. And what you see is that a lot of people, that there's a big overlap, that a lot of entrepreneurs have pre-existing mental health conditions, going back to before they even knew that self-employment was an option. There are studies on 8th grade, middle school boys with ADHD, longitudinal studies, who grow up to become entrepreneurs. And ADHD is one of those pre-existing mental health conditions that is actually very compatible with entrepreneurship. And so many people with different kinds of mental health issues are actually drawn to entrepreneurship. It's a good fit for who they are. And then in the orange circle, the gold circle down here, what I'm trying to show is that entrepreneurship is a wild ride. And if you have a pre-existing mental health condition, that can be triggered. And if you don't have a pre-existing mental health condition, you're still not safe, because the events of entrepreneurship can result in mental health symptoms. So if you have co-founder conflict, or if you fail to get funded, or if you're not finding product market fit, or if you end up in a lawsuit, these things can be very stressful and demoralizing and can lead to anxiety and depression, even if you never previously had any mental health conditions. So there's a lot of different pathways into mental health differences for entrepreneurs, and that's why it's so common. So Lisa Andreessen mentioned that we did some research together, and this is the study after that. The study that she helped with is on the internet, and if you just go to Google Scholar and look up the prevalence of entrepreneur mental health conditions, you'll find that study. Some of my other colleagues helped with a subsequent study that was bigger and had a better sample and better statistical methods. And this was in this study we did with the Gallup organization. and University of California, and we had a grant from the Kauffman Foundation. And we studied 1,000 entrepreneurs and compared them with 1,000 managers from a national probability sample, which is it's a kind of unbeatable way to make sure that you don't have bias in your sample. And here's what we found. We found that at the end of the day, if you go back to the blue circle, 38% of the entrepreneurs in this sample had diagnosable mental health conditions. 3% made suicide attempts. And I should mention, and then the people on the margin here of this slide are entrepreneurs who did commit suicide. And that was the reason I got into doing this, is that I mean, as Chris mentioned, I am a serial entrepreneur myself. But there was a moment in the 1990s when there just every week seemed to be another news story about entrepreneurs committing suicide. And I decided to see if there wasn't something we can do about that. So this is the number, 3%. If anybody in the room ever had suicidal thoughts, you are not alone. A lot of people, for 3% to make a suicide attempt, it probably means, 15% of people, of entrepreneurs, have suicidal thoughts. I've heard that like 2 or 3 times this week already. And 1.7% have a history of psychiatric hospitalization. So I guess my point here is this is real, it's significant, and it can lead to adverse outcomes. That's what we want to prevent. But my other point is for the policy people. And Chris, this is the message I'd like to kind of filter back to Startup Grind. That prosperity through entrepreneurship requires people who have mental health conditions. So, why did God create entrepreneurs? The idea was that entrepreneurship is a pathway for economic development in democratic countries. And in America, about 10 or 11% of people are entrepreneurs, meaning self-employed with or without employees. And if you include the employees, that accounts for 30+% of just jobs. But when you look at like total contribution to GDP, it's much higher than that. And so if our economy is going to depend on entrepreneurs for economic growth and development and full employment, that means we have to be aware of and have a strategy around mental health of entrepreneurs. And so that is the sort of high-level message for high-level people.
And Michael, you and I will coordinate this and develop this message for the global community offline, okay?
Sounds good.
Now you had started into some statistics. Are you going to get any deeper than that?
I could, if you want to. What else would you like to know? I'll put that back up on the board here.
Well, one of the things that absolutely shocked me as I was researching this topic, and I believe that you or one of your colleagues was probably responsible for coming up with most of these, is that 72% of we entrepreneurs are affected by mental illness in one way, shape, or form.
Oh, yeah.
And 32% of us have more than one mental health issue that we're struggling with, that we're 3 times more likely to suffer from depression, anxiety, stress, and fear. 62% of us owners feel depressed at least once a week. We're 10 times more likely to be diagnosed with some level of bipolar disorder on the bipolar continuum. We're 3 times more likely to deal with addiction and abuse of drugs. We're ADHD, we suffer 6 times more probability of being ADHD, which goes right to your point of, how ADHD and entrepreneurship, there's a positive correlation and a positive opportunity there, but it's also something that has to be managed. And that we're twice as likely to have been hospitalized for a mental health condition or issue. You mentioned suicide, and you gave statistics there, and that 58% of us feel like we're suffering with imposter syndrome. And I thought those were statistics that came across to me as being scientifically founded and paints what I would call a brutal reality picture at some level of detail of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And guilty as charged, my team is responsible for a lot of those statistics. What I didn't say is that the 38% who have at least one diagnosis, what Chris said is true, is that within that group, many have 2 co-occurring conditions. It's possible to have a substance use issue and have ADHD. Some have 3 co-occurring conditions. But for the ones who don't have any mental health issues at all, it turns out that it was all around them as they grew up, because of this stuff runs in families. And so we found so let's say 62% did not, in that study I just showed you, did not have mental health conditions, but literally half of that group had a sibling or a parent or a child with some really significant mental health issue. And so their lives were very involved with mental health, even though it didn't personally affect them. And in fact, the bigger picture issue is that these mental health conditions are associated with positive traits. So let's take depression, since Chris mentioned that one. So one of the traits, the positive traits that is associated with depression, is realism. And you've heard of depressive realism. And entrepreneurs are like notorious for wishful thinking. And that's why nobody would start a business if you knew ahead of time that
Or the ability to recognize risk, I believe, as well.
Exactly. So the entrepreneurs that are prone to depression are also more realistic and exercise better judgment, and they have a greater capacity for empathy, which is important if you want to have tighter relationships with your team and also with your customers. So there's an upside to being down, and that applies to each and every one of these conditions. And the superpower story, which it's like a related story, is that there are these positive traits, and the positive traits are linked to the mental health issues. And so for the entrepreneurs here, in the green here, that it looks as if they don't have any mental health issues. Their families live over here, and these are the lucky ones who got the positive traits: the energy, the creativity, the good social skills, but they didn't get the full-blown bipolar disorder, for example, that also associates with those traits. I'll just say a couple words about dopamine. This is a dopamine molecule down here. So we're used to, diversity is a hot topic right now, and we're used to like ethnic diversity, racial diversity, gender diversity, age diversity, many kinds of diversity based on characteristics that you can observe about another person. But what you can't observe is neurodiversity. And what that means is that brains are not all cut from the same cloth, that there's a lot of differences in brains, and that entrepreneurs have a particular neurophysiology that leads to these mental health differences, vulnerabilities, and superpowers. And most of this neurodiversity, or much of this neurodiversity, has to do with atypical dopamine physiology and reward processing. So dopamine is a molecule, it's a neurotransmitter. And this anatomical diagram drawing kind of illustrates the pathways in the brain that depend upon dopamine, and most of them are associated with goal pursuit and reward processing. And that's why I said entrepreneurs have goals. And here's what that looks like. When these dopamine pathways are activated, then entrepreneurs flip into this state of goal pursuit. And associated with the goal pursuit are these emotions like excitement, elevated levels of energy, and elevated levels of confidence. And there are other things that go along with this, as creativity, for example. This is not everybody is like this. So entrepreneurs will work harder to pursue it. In psychology and classical, if you took Psych 101 and studied mice in mazes, what you find out is that you exert effort in order to reach a goal. And entrepreneurs will exert a lot more effort and try a lot harder to reach a goal, and they'll experience more energy, more excitement, more enthusiasm, more confidence. And basically the dopaminergic pathways are just more highly activated among entrepreneurs. Yeah, question?
Add a little bit with when we talk about those that are neurologically atypical in entrepreneurship. I don't know the statistics. I think Chris might have had some, but there's a significantly higher population of neurologically atypical people in entrepreneurship, I think, is a safe assumption. And the way that I describe it is we see the world different. So we see different problems and we come up with different solutions. The other piece is that a lot of neurologically atypical people have one special area of interest that takes over everything else. And they don't really always prioritize interpersonal relationships either. And so I think that, when we look at neurodiversity, just summing it up as, we just see the world differently is what I kind of tend to land on.
That's right. Yeah. You're looking through a different filter. Mm-hmm. And related to that is the ability to recognize opportunities. And that's why I think, and to recognize opportunity and to minimize risk. Entrepreneurs have, one of those personality traits is risk propensity, and entrepreneurs, let's just put it, they have a different internal equation going on. So let's see. So, the question is, how much are you going to risk in order to get that reward? And most people, entrepreneurs will risk a lot more, and they believe that the reward is a lot more rewarding than most other people do. So you're right about that. You see the world differently. You experience the world differently. It has a different feel to it, and as a result, so here's goal pursuit again with the excitement, energy, and confidence. As a result, if you see a goal out there that you believe you can achieve, and you think it's very rewarding, then this dopamine activation kind of gets upregulated, and people become hyperactive, they strive, they become hypomanic, and eventually too much of a good thing becomes a bad thing, and people wipe out. They flame out, they burn out, and they just become exhausted and don't know how to hit the brakes. And so in the emerging literature on entrepreneur mental health, a lot of the people that you will listen to on TED Talks talk about restoration, down-regulating the goal pursuit, down-regulating the activation of these dopaminergic systems. And that also, too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. So if you, and we'll talk about this more later, but if you meditate, or if you take a bath at the end of the day, or if you use some kind of Headspace Calm app, or if you take walks in nature or do other things to just kind of wind yourself down and restore, you can get back to a state of equanimity as opposed to this kind of agitation and hyperactivity and striving that leads to burnout. But you can overcorrect in that direction as well and lose your momentum, become disengaged, develop apathy, and ultimately depression. And so that's kind of a look inside the brain. And on the outside of the brain, and when I talk to entrepreneurs, I then become aware of what people's personality traits are, what mental health conditions they may have either before they got to the party or as a result of the party, and then what narratives, what stories you tell yourself. Like Susie, you're in a growth phase right now, and you're sort of suggesting that your engagement with the business crowds out your personal relationships. And I'm sure there's a narrative about that. And those narratives kind of become
I was thinking too about generally, I think being an entrepreneur is very isolating for many, and the other, so it's also those social bonds and connections, but then also our relationship to sleep. And then also how neurodiversity affects our sleep and our circadian rhythm and all of those things. And I think it's those bonds and connections and those good sleep routines that don't get protected as well when we're entrepreneurs. And those can increase mental health symptoms across the board.
Really good point.
And create some that might not have been there. Sorry.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And on the list of restoration, sleep is the number one.
Yeah.
Sleep is the single best thing you can do for yourself. And so I thought maybe just to kind of package this a little bit, let's talk about some of the things that you can do to maintain that balance. And I guess I wanted to talk about blockers first. Entrepreneurs are reluctant to address mental health issues because of shame and stigma, and because they're afraid of losing investor confidence. So somehow, and Chris, this is kind of where you come in, we've got to help people understand that this is totally normal for entrepreneurs, and that investors, you want to be investing in people who have this set of issues. That's why they get the good business outcomes. So destigmatization is kind of a necessary first step here. But this is kind of what I advise in my mental wellness coaching tips. The first thing is, if recognize and accept and deal with your mental health issues. If you know that you have anxiety or depression or ADHD or whatever, just be okay with that, and then be willing to ask for help, seek help. And to the point about the isolation and aloneness that you experience, that's very common. It's a lonely path. And so I really advise you to have two things, a wellness accountability partner and a personal board of directors. Your wellness accountability partner is whoever that person is in your life, someone who loves you, who doesn't want you to burn out and who doesn't want you to flip out, and who wants you to remember that you work to live, you don't live to work. And that, believe it or not, it sounds like a simple concept, but it doesn't, when you're in the thick of it, it's very hard. You almost have to look at that in writing. With your board of directors, if you're starting a business, then you have advisors and consultants. And among your advisors and consultants, it should be people who have been through some of those challenges and who can share their experience with how to cope and manage through. And then more broadly with your community, again, this is about fighting the isolation. Just have a network of friends. Often you don't want to. You don't want to like make time for people because it doesn't feel like it's a good use of time. I had one entrepreneur in my practice who was telling me about her company, and I asked her, "Do you have any friends?" Simple question. And she thought about it, and her answer was, "I'm not very good at watering my friendship garden." And so I would say keep your watering can nearby and remember to just stay engaged. Even before you start your business, make a list of who your 10 friends are and make sure that by the end of the month you've connected with each of them.
Michael, that is an incredibly good point that I'd like to explore a little further, and that is this. We obviously have gone through, since, let's say, September of 2019, with all of the geopolitical stuff, and then we got hit with COVID, and it's thrown at least I know for me, it's thrown my whole concept of relationships with family, with friends, with business associates into complete chaos. How do we? Okay, so now I sit here and I say, how do I continue to make sure people know I'm thinking of them, yet not able to do so in a very natural way of that interpersonal reaction? And I know a lot of us are reluctant, even the most open of us are reluctant to open up and share about mental health issues with someone, number one. And number two, now that we seem to be approaching the steep downhill slope of this thing, what can we do now as family, friends, partners, entrepreneurs, founders, etc., do to rethink and re-strategize how we want to and choose to reestablish those connections and those relationships and those interpersonal bonds? How should we be thinking about building those more effective support networks, those more close interpersonal relationships than what we may have done in the past?
Yeah, this is what happens when you live too close to Washington, D.C. It sounds like you're talking about emotional build back better.
Oh, we believe me, we won't go there, but to me, it's been more than one thing, and this hasn't been around Washington. It's been a national issue at some level, but the crisis actually started several months before the first cases of COVID came into play. And
In terms of
Uh,
mental illness, Chris, is that
what's that?
in terms of like mental illness in America,
No,
or?
in terms of many of the what I would call embedded, safe, um, standards of how people define their interpersonal relationships with, say, the world, with you know, the U.S., with politics, with people, and then to be shoved into closets and locked down for how long, however long we've been locked down. I know for me, it's really scrambled my definitions of relationships and how I think I want to interact coming out of this. I think that's more where I'm coming from, as opposed to just dealing with it on a mental health basis. Yeah, that's incredibly important, but then dealing with it on a day-to-day basis in reality is also going to have a significant impact on how well we deal with it from a mental health perspective, it would seem to me.
This makes me think of there's a TED talk by Johann Hari called "Everything You Know About Addiction Is Wrong," and he brings up some key points about bonds and connections and how much that's related to driving addiction. That addiction is as much about these bonds and connections as it is chemical hooks. And so he kind of references the rat in a cage study, where they put the rat in a cage with the 2 water bottles, one with water, one with like heroin infused water, and rat after rat would overdose, on the water. So he came up with the, once an addict, always an addict belief about things, and focused very much on the chemical hooks. But there was a subsequent study that he talks about where they put rats in the cages with other rats and things to do and habit trails and the same bottles of water, and not a single one of them overdosed. And he also brings up how since the 70s, our floor space has increased while our bonds and connections have decreased. And so, like, Chris, what you were saying is that there's been kind of this like fragile sense with bonds and connections and how we interact as humans. At the same time, we have this very divisive 2-party system that makes arguments occur before discussions even begin. And that's been played out more so historically over the past few decades, that you're defined by your, politics oftentimes. And now we have this pandemic that puts us all back in that cage with the 2 water bottles alone. And it's, in a nation where mental health has been the leading source of disease burden for a long time, and also facing a massive mental health provider shortage. So we are seeing, shocking numbers and statistics. And when I look at that 3% suicide rate with entrepreneurs, to me, that seems low, because suicide in the past couple of years has gone from the second leading cause of death for those ages like 14 to 24 to 10 to 34. And that's a huge group of people. And so that it's, and then Chris, you had mentioned after that, those, or Michael, one of you had that those thoughts are very common. I think that we have a nation of people at minimum experiencing passive suicidal ideation. And then you add entrepreneurship and then things like neurodiversity into the equation. It's a very perplexing time right now.
Yeah, I don't really have a lot to add to that. I think that during the pandemic, a lot of people developed tighter bonds with a smaller group of people. And that was certainly my experience. And I would say that as you come out of it, maintain that structure. Those are your true friends, and those are the family members who will be there, when the chips are down, and who are really the most important to you. Entrepreneurs are typically either constitutionally or situationally extroverted, and you end up knowing a lot of people. And it's very easy to know a lot of people superficially rather than a few people well. And so I would keep boundaries around that and understand it's hard, because the other thing about entrepreneurs is that we're all having fun doing this. It's kind of exciting, and we have we're prone to these positive emotions, and we enjoy each other's company, and we get energized. by socializing. And so you end up feeling close to people that you're actually not really that close to. And it's a little, it can be confusing. But I think if you can think back on what worked for you during the pandemic and make sure that that core group of friends and family is like your home group, and then you really invest energy in maintaining those relationships. That, to me, that would be a good place to start. The other thing that entrepreneurs do is they join support groups. Like, I think YPO has these support groups, and Chris, I don't know if Startup Grind has support groups or not, but they're out there.
We don't yet, but I'm advocating for that. That's why I want you and I to connect offline after this event to talk about those ideas further.
Yeah, a lot of entrepreneurs find having a group of 5 or 10 other entrepreneurs that you meet with once a month, and you can really let your hair down. And those of you who still have hair, and just open up, that can be a very useful and helpful structure as well. And then, if you do belong to some kind of a broader community, whether it's community around your kids, or if you belong to a church, or if you're in a community based on a shared interest like environmentalism, for example, you can have ways of being engaged with people that have nothing to do with work. And that, but isolation is a net negative for mental health, isolation and aloneness. And so finding ways to overcome that. And I think the idea of thoughtfully building back into that makes a lot of sense. These are other pointers I've picked up along the way. One is to do work that's aligned with your values, because you'll feel more energized by it because you care about it. As an entrepreneur, you're very aware of how you're allocating your time every day. So if you're allocating time into work that you find meaningful, it's uplifting. And then we talked about the hyperactivity and the sense of urgency. If you can think of the gears turning in the upregulation direction, finding ways to be patient and to release the urgency is very important, so that you don't make impulsive choices which can end up being harmful, but also so that you maintain more of a sense of emotional equilibrium. People who feel urgent tend to get agitated, and they feel frustrated when they get blocked from achieving a goal. So it's important to just keep it all in perspective. You're just building a business. It's not really life and death. It's just the next step on a pathway. I put this self-esteem bullet point in here because I have found in my work as a therapist that many entrepreneurs actually come into it with low self-esteem, and that one of the benefits of being an entrepreneur is that it gives you something to feel proud about. But I think that there's a risk if your sense of pride is attached to your business, because your business is affected by so many factors that are beyond your control. The pandemic is a really good example. A lot of companies that were doing great just got wiped out by the pandemic, whereas other companies exploded because of the pandemic. And it had nothing to do with whether or not you are a genius. It's that businesses live in an ecosystem, and things that you can't even anticipate or predict are going to influence how your business works out. So if you have internal self-esteem rather than external validation, you're going to be more stable and more well, and you'll be able to tolerate it when things are going great. You won't like exaggerate what that means, and if things are not going well, you won't be inappropriately demoralized by it. But you don't overcorrect in either direction. I suggest that as an entrepreneur, you always have a growth mindset for your business, but you want to couple that with a personal growth mindset. What is your one personal growth opportunity right now? And if you can always have in mind a personal growth opportunity as well as a business opportunity, then that will help you maintain a more balanced approach to life in general. Denial, I said, don't pretend things are good when they really aren't. Denial is a powerful force that leads people, well, it leads you to wipe out anybody who's ever been to a 12-step meeting. You can spend all night listening to people talk about how they were in denial and made mistakes that had consequences. We talked about trigger situations before. Chris, the example was that you're an introvert, but when you get into a networking event, you become an extrovert. So if there are trigger situations that are going to trigger anxiety or trigger impulsivity or trigger mood swings, then if you know what they are, then you can proactively manage those triggers. It's hard to go to, well, apparently we will have Thanksgiving in 2021. And that's a really good thing, except for people that have a problem with drinking. And so if you know that seeing, alcohol is a trigger for craving and that you have a risk of losing self-control, then you can think ahead and bring a non-alcoholic beverage with you that, proactively manage it that way. Or you can ask the host to pour the drinks in the other room and then put whatever the bottle is, put it back in the pantry. Recognize early warning signs. If you are one of those people that does have some kind of a diagnosable mental health issue like anxiety, depression, panic disorder, bipolar, addiction, whatever, when you go into a more severe state, that usually follows warning signs. And so if you know what the warning signs are, like if you know that you just can't get yourself to bed, well, that's a warning sign that you might be about to have a manic episode, for example. Then when you see the warning sign, do something about the warning sign. And there's like a checklist of things you can do for each warning sign. Okay, a last couple suggestions. Build moments of restoration and gratitude into each day. In other words, take a break, walk out the door and breathe some fresh air. Allow yourself to look at the visual horizon, feel the sun or the wind on your face, and just reboot. That's the restoration cogwheel is the one that brings you back into the equanimity you need in order to really maintain your balance. And then basic wellness. We didn't really talk a lot about basic wellness, but you'll have heard about it a million times. It's sleep, sunlight, exercise, nutrition, maintaining your body weight, social support, pleasurable activities, coping skills. That's probably should have been the first thing that we said, but it's really essential to just have a basic wellness framework for kind of getting through every day and every week. know what your superpowers are. If you are like Sean, if you are an extrovert, then Sean, you're going to be good at business development. And that's your superpower. And I would say that's, if you can bring that into your career, that will be what you can use to make your business succeed. But if your vulnerability is just the opposite, you got caught off guard by the pandemic, and having an extrovert in lockdown is not a good thing. So if you know that that's a vulnerability, then if you have some coping skills to manage times when you do find yourself cut off from other people, that will make a difference. And there you go. I think that's, don't derail, prioritize your mental health, overcome barriers, and stay balanced. That is what I wanted to share with you today, and I really appreciate you being part of the conversation.
Well, Michael, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And what I'd like to do now is to throw the event open for open discussion, ideation, and Q&A. And the next to the last slide, and I think the one before that, really hit home for me in a number of ways. And I got to the beginning. I've had a huge series of health issues over the last 15 months. Started with a month-long bout of pneumonia. Then I had a torn retina in my left eye that required, surgery. Came down with COVID, and then had this heart procedure that I've been dealing with. So, number one, I was struggling with all of those things. A, B, God help me for admitting this, but I turned 65 this year, and you talk about having an impact on my mental health. That certainly was a rude awakening. But through all of this, I really wanted to see if I could make some changes to allow me to better cope with some of the things I was going through. And some things that I've developed that are working for me quite nicely are things such as, when I work, I will work in 50-minute blocks and then purposely take 10 minutes off and do nothing more than go out on my back patio and practice what I call 10 minutes of micro meditation, which is literally nothing more than me closing my eyes and breathing deeply in and out for 10 minutes. I've been amazed at how quickly I regain the sense of centeredness and my focus and concentration. The second thing is, I have a near fatal reaction to anything that has to do with exercise. I'm probably the most sedentary person in the world, but I've always had a love for and an interest in exploring the martial arts, particularly Tai Chi. So I found an online course and began learning what Tai Chi is, and now practice that, which I found further allows me to meditate, which helps me to further clear, my mind. And then the final thing is, I finally developed the attitude that, look, I'm 60 years old, or 60 plus years old. And no matter how you cut it, no matter how much money you make, no matter how poor you are, no matter how many beautiful cars you drive, unless you can tell me that you truly have found a different way of putting your underwear on every morning, you're no different than anybody else. And when I finally was able to wrap my head around that concept and realize that I'm no better, I'm no worse, I'm no different than anybody else, regardless of circumstances, that was a huge freeing moment for me. And I just thought I'd throw those out there as just some practical things that I've learned and done over the last year to 18 months that have really helped me get a better handle on how to deal with my specific mental health issues. So that being said, please, everybody, chime in, ask questions, provide thoughts and insights, because we're here to help one another. And the more we share with one another, the more we're going to walk away with actionable takeaways and ways we can help ourselves.
So Chris, I'd like to chime in. I too, about 10 minutes an hour, go out. I'm a slave to my Fitbit. I play my little Fitbit game. Try and get 250 steps 12 times every single day.
Okay.
I happen to live on a cul-de-sac with about 12 houses on it. And it's 500 steps around the cul-de-sac, which is just perfect. But not only has taken that time around the cul-de-sac over and over and over, I tell my neighbors what I'm doing so that, so they understand. But I've gotten to know every single neighbor in every single house. And so then that brings in the sense of community. Now that's not going to work for everybody in every situation, but in suburbia here in Maryland, it's very helpful. And it's also helped the chronic fatigue in terms of the pacing. And, not exceeding my energy envelope for the day. And I also have heart failure, which is a problem. I've had that since I delivered my second daughter. And so I really can't walk very far anyway. So it's increased my stamina as well. So.
Thank you, Cheryl, for sharing that.
Yeah.
Would anybody else like to chime in with questions or share what they do on a daily or weekly basis to help keep themselves grounded, or have ideas that you're going to take away from here that may help you going forward?
Well, I'll just say for myself, I really prioritize sleep. I got 9 hours last night. It was great. And I make sure to exercise every day. And then also kind of hiking in nature is very restorative for me. But having relationships with neighbors, getting out and taking a break and getting some steps in, doing the 10 minutes of deep breathing, working 50 minutes on and 10 minutes off. These are all really positive. And then having some perspective about it, like you just knowing that at the end of the day, we're more alike than we are different. Those are all really good ways of staying balanced.
We try to integrate some of the components of working together in person online, because we found those to be crucial. And so Stephanie and I have our 10 a.m. we don't really start working before then. Because sleep is important.
That's self-care right there.
It is self-care. But so we have our meeting of the minds from 10 a.m. to 11. We're just on Zoom. Anyone in the organization's welcome. We're drinking our coffee, kind of figuring out, what we're going to do throughout our day. It's working alone I've found for a lot of people is very difficult, and they miss co-working. So we'll co-work together throughout the day just on Zoom. And then the other thing that I do is I roller skate at a bird sanctuary. I just got new roller skates last year. So there they are.
Oh, awesome.
But yeah, it's without that time, I find I'm like chasing my tail and chewing furniture, and which makes winter a hard time, because I can't go out and skate, but yeah, it's important to move. They say that sitting is the new smoking. And I think that telecommuting involves a lot of sitting right now. Yeah.
I think kind of tack on a little bit to what Chris said earlier about, recognizing that for yourself, you're the same as everybody else, and I think one thing that I've learned within the last year, coming out of a very high stress type work environment before I joined into TBH, is that setting the expectation for myself that I would set for everybody else has been kind of a epiphany for me, because I'm kind of a person that just goes until I fall over. And so understanding that for myself, like, why would I expect myself to do that when I wouldn't expect that of anybody on my team?
Mhm.
That was a big realization and has been very helpful for me, just my own mental health and well-being. So I'll add that.
Well, thank you, Stephanie. We appreciate it. Anybody else? Hi, Liz.
Susan, the skating in the bird sanctuary, that's super awesome. I want to try that myself.
I would highly recommend Moxie Skates. They're also owned by a woman-owned small business. Her name is Estrogen.
Okay.
That's the skate name. They come with a heel, so you're more stable, and they're designed for women by women.
Awesome. Well, thank you for the tip. One of the things that I've been doing probably for about 5 years now is journaling every morning, or almost every morning. And I'd say that the first few years the jury was out on whether or not that really helped or actually brought about more anxiety. But I think over time, it actually has helped, just to get it sort of out of my head and either into the world, even though it's just on paper. But I found more recently that by doing that, if I do it in the morning before the workday starts, I'm able to just kind of get all that out and out of the way, and then kind of be a little bit more balanced going into the workday.
There's a couple of things with journaling too, because journaling can increase anxiety and can help to solidify neural pathways that might lead us towards like feelings of anxiousness. Coloring, doodling, and making to-do lists all have the same effect on your brain, which is to help develop healthier neural pathways and create space for the old ones to atrophy. So even if it's not something profound, I sit on a journal that ends up being a haiku about tater tots. And I'm like, well, that's not very self-defining. Just doodling, list making, and coloring all have that same positive effect.
I'll share one more with you as well that's related to journaling. We did a program recently about depression among entrepreneurs. And so I did research on how to prevent depression. And this is something, of course, I've studied a lot over the years, but it's always good to refresh. And what I found was that one very large study was completed recently that rank ordered the effectiveness of various antidepressant things you can do. I always thought of exercise as being like the most effective antidepressant, and it is very, very effective. It's as effective as any medication, and sleep as well. But what surprised me was that number one on the list is that having somebody to confide in has more effectiveness at preventing depression than any of the other behavioral interventions. So journaling is not exactly confiding in somebody, but if you can just remember to keep that channel open, and if it's a loved one or a close friend or even a therapist, I would put that one on the list of how to maintain wellness as well.
Well, thank you. Everyone, thank you very much for an incredible event, for an incredible discussion. We are at the point where we need to stop. And, one of the things that I ask everybody to think about as they go about their evening, and that is to please communicate with us or with others, things like, what did you learn? And what did you take away? And then what do you need? And then finally, how can we help? Whether it's Startup Grind, whether it's Chris Haug, whether it's Michael Freeman, Econa, etc., please do not hesitate to reach out and let us know what we might be able to do to help you. And with that being said, Michael, thank you so very, very much for your time and input. And you and I will be in communication a little later. We'll be in communication tomorrow, okay?
Sounds good.
Susie, thank you so very much for joining us and for providing your insights. It was a thrill to have you back. And with that, everybody, or with that being said, everybody, I guess you could call this this event a wrap. And thank you for your participation.
Thanks so much.
Okay.